turning heavier at last, and to a new band here, Upon Stone. Dead Mother Moon is the name of it. This is a debut album. It's a immediate new signing to Century Media as well. It's one that, you know, I was sent my way, and it caught my attention. I was like, oh, that could be something that I would like. But then seeing the reaction upon it being released last week, it was like, yeah, people like it, and that is cool, because this is a thing that we don't actually review an awful lot of. It feels like one of the areas in which sort of cutting edge new bands have been comparatively dry. Melodic death metal.
In terms of what we've covered for this, it's, you know, it's been the sort of the classic Gothenburg bands with their kind of like latter day, late career ones, or something like the Halo effect, which is people of that scene doing a new band, but it's still got that kind of vintage of that initial burst of it. So yeah, I don't really have much kind of frame of reference for new, like, exciting young melodic death metal bands. But when I hear play on this, and I was like, it is as Gothenburg sort of mellow death album as you can get without coming from Gothenburg and just being this kind of new band. And I was like, oh, it's nice to hear this music be hungry and like energized and not old and what In Flames were doing.
Yeah, because when we talk about genres that are in a creative right, it's very easy to look at metalcore and pop punk and gent and all of those things. You know, where there might still be a commercially viable operation, but greatness is kind of rare for many of them. But one genre that I think the fact we overlook it almost speaks to the rut that it's been in is melodic death metal. I can't remember the last time there was a new band, like you say, outside of the Halo effect, which it doesn't really feel like a new band, that have generated real interest. Because I don't know, like maybe I'm not so au fait with it, but a lot of the stuff that I've heard from the genre in the last 10 years, it either takes some stuff that I'm less keen on, like Dark Tranquillity or Arch Enemy, and some of it just ends up sounding like Killswitch Engage without the beatdowns. And it's been a long time since I've heard a melodic death metal record that scratched the itch and gave me the excitement that the bands that made the genre legendary were able to do.
Yeah, there have been a couple in recent years, and I guess, you know, melodic death metal at its peak is like one of the best genres ever. Like that mid-90s period produced some of the all-time greatest records, some of the all-time great metal bands. For a long time now, I think it's been primarily referenced for influence more than its current vitality, I guess is how you would say it. Like, and that's not to say that some of those great bands aren't doing very well. You know, At the Gates coming back slowly over a series of records, turning into like a strange prog band, I find really rewarding. Carcass came back and do what they do. Amon Amarth, you know, evolved from that period to being like at their peak size-wise and popularity-wise, you know, arena band sort of now. But there haven't been a lot of, I guess, new bands or new records that have done much with it. I think one of the main problems for me has been kind of, by the turn of the 2000s, that music had become so polished and so kind of integrated into the mainstream of what metal was that it kind of loses the death part of the melodic death metal for a lot of people. And like, I'm totally cool with like a slick, polished Arch Enemy or a Soilwork record or something, but it kind of feels like that became the new norm for it. And, you know, like you mentioned the Halo effect, which is kind of like almost like the biggest melodeath event in the last few years, which is, you know, members of those classic bands throwing back to that classic sound. And that was good, that record, but they are all veteran professionals rather than upcoming bands, and also their studio project sounds very slick and very clean, as you would expect from people who are like 30 years into a career. There has been, very slowly bubbling up in the last couple of years, a small handful of examples of bands who have kind of run counter to that and kind of turned back the clock to basically before that like overwhelming squeakiness kind of happens to melodic death metal, reviving some of the underground sensibility of it. The first one that I really took notice of was this band called Dungeon Serpent, who I think Alec might have had in his top 20 one year, but they're really heavy, like they're fucking brutal, but it's kind of like an Amon Amarth meets Bolt Thrower thing type happening. Last year, a record got a lot of acclaim in the underground from a band called Majesties, who they are going very much for that kind of like Jester Race in Flames, Dark Tranquillity thing, but like a lot of people felt that was like the best thing in that sound for quite a long time. Now we have Upon Stone, and the reason, again, this is the first one we're like really reviewing outside of just quality, is I think this is the first one of this kind of class of like new melodeath bands with the grit put back into it, who I think have a bit of widespread appeal outside of just like extreme metal folk, because, you know, like they've got the guy who did the cover arts for the Jester Race and Horacle to do this, so it looks the part, but this is like a really hard-hitting, exciting newer metal record that I would give to people who are, if you like, you know, contemporary hard bands, kind of doing a classic thing. You know, if you like things like Enforced or anything like that, obviously it doesn't sound like that, but in sort of in spirit, like this is the sort of new Melodeath band who I can see kind of falling into that lane of just like, this is just a really fucking cool, hungry sounding metal record.
I mean, I've seen people who are coming out from hardcore who have been tweeting about this and kind of be like, Upon Stone are fucking wicked. Like, it's definitely crossing over where people who aren't your typical kind of Melodeath fans are really good for this. I mean, I'd probably sit into that bracket. I quite like some Melodeath, but it's not, you know, one of those genres I'm going to reach for. But I've had such a good time with this because it just sounds hungry and gritty and like really intense. And so like when those riffs are coming at you, like, and it's all loads of shred and loads of melody in those guitar like leads and riffs, but they're so aggressive and they're blasting the drums away. Like it is just a constant onslaught. There's barely any reprieve in these sort of songs unless they kind of move into like a deliberate ambient kind of slow interlude part. Like it's so full blast. So like Dead Mother Moon just hits play on this album and you are great with that, like that onslaught of riffs and like screams. It's so in your face.
I love this record. Like, it's not really the most competitive month in terms of releases, but this is far and away my favourite. I've not heard those bands that you just mentioned, and I will go and check those out because, you know, I'm now quite hungry for melodic death metal. But this is the band and the record I've been waiting this genre to.
This is my favourite of those ones I mentioned as well. It's not the first one that's kind of done something like this, but I think it is the one that is, like I said, did it on the most kind of like, there is crossover here kind of scale.
This is just, it's like Slaughter of the Soul, the Jester Race, and Storm of the Light's Bane just shredded up and reshaped into something. In some cases, at some moments of the road, even more at it. It's just, it kind of reminded me what a fucking brilliant sound melodic death metal is at its best.
Yeah, the death metal part of the equation is like in force here. Like the main riff that opens up the title track is so jagged and so snarling. Tonally, you know, might not be a million miles away from something like Undeath, you know. And I think again, some of that reason there's that crossover happening, and some of the people who are clued into this record give major props to Taylor Young of the Pit Studios, where this album was produced and recorded. Like, this is a pure and simple Melodeath record. It's not a metalcore record in the sense of like hardcore kids taking those melodies and those riffs as they did in the early 2000s, but it does have that feel that a lot of those metal records have at the moment of like hardcore guys have clearly gotten into those styles of music and kind of put a bit of their fingerprints on it. There's an actual chorus in the title track where it reaches that Dead Mother Moon and the kind of melodies start to lift off around it, and like after that first minute of like real brutality, that feels like the first moment of like, oh shit, like melody has kind of made an impact and been kind of recontextualized by the surrounding death metal in a way that we have been kind of starved of, because a lot of melodic death metal over the last 20 years became kind of so wishy-washy, and it's like a brutal song, but it balances that with like a huge stirring kind of grandeur. Like My Destiny a Weapon as well, like legit death metal churn and fucking gutsy filth in that riff, but at the same time guitar playing is really legit. There's almost always a really meticulously composed solo section in each song that doesn't kind of get absorbed into the overall kind of swab of melodic death metal.
I like the solos in this. They've got all the sort of pomp and kind of like showmanship you'd want from this, but they are just a constant like shot in the arm to just like, okay, we now have to bring the song to the next level. None of them ever feel like they're kind of derailing the song. They don't go on too long. It's just all go all the time like for this, and it's constantly adding new things to kind of go like, oh, that sounds really exciting and cool, and just I'm so like in on this record just for how much fun I'm having with it and how hard it goes.
And the way it sounds, it's, you know, it's not a completely filthy, dirgy, dungeony sounding record, but it's you know, like you said, it's not a Soilwork record where everything's squeaky clean. But it means that when the lead parts come in on these songs, like on the title track or My Destiny a Weapon, like power metal level flourishes. But again, it's that old cliche. It means when the riff comes back in, it hits so much harder. And like Onyx Through the Heart, which might be the best song in it, when that opens, it sounds like Sargeist or something. It's like a blizzard of black metal riffs, and then it moves into this like Clayman style, just kind of huge sounding melodic death metal song. And then another riff, I was just like, oh my god, that's like Ora Pro Nobis Lucifer. Just as a combination of things, one after the other. It's so fucking good.
for me, that song in kind of terms of, you mentioned Clayman. For me, it's like it hits that kind of crunch. It hits a kind of warm yet stomping feel. It's like I am 14 and I'm listening to Once Sent from the Golden Hall. Like those kind of classic tones, but the melodies, but the tone is like rough and gritty. The one for what you're saying about the kind of the almost like power metal flourish is the very first second of Dusk Sang Fairest is hilarious because that second is so heavy it feels like it's going to go full death metal, and instead the biggest arm swaying in the air in flames melody on the record just like erupts out of it and takes over. It's like, oh shit, that's hit me and taken me off guard.
I mean, I was saying, like, just back to Onyx with Height, it was that last 30 seconds of that where those guitar melodies or those leads coming in and you go like, that's really just, it sounds so majestic with there's so much going on. But yeah, Dusk Sang Fairest, it's almost like this, like, again, really big, bright, melodic thing just coming up for that 30 second, that first bit. It's so funny. And then, again, you get to the last 30 seconds of that song or so, and they just unload all these riffs out again, and it's the way they can build up to these massive closing moments in songs that are really fast and heavy, but they have, like, when the melodies hit, it's so sweeping, and you can get so caught up and lost in the kind of the majesty of it all.
Yeah, like To Seek and Follow the Call of Lions is pure at the gates, like thrash metal with kind of hummable but frantic riffs. Awesome. There are bits on that which feel like Adrian Erlandson could be playing the drums, the kind of little quirks of it. One of the things that you've mentioned a couple of them, Elliot, but one of the things that I love at this record is, to me, like, it's a Melodeath throwback, but maybe it's just the recording quality or anything, but to me it doesn't sound like Slaughter of the Soul or Clayman or on the kind of usual top line of like when those bands broke big. To me, it's like it goes back to Terminal Spirit Disease and Once Sent from the Golden Hall from Amon Amarth, and like interludes on it that could be from the Somberland. The arch enemy that I hear on it is like Black Earth, Burning Bridges, like up to and including Wages of Sin era when like Arch Enemy's tone could fucking cut glass. The soil work is like A Predator's Portrait, Chain Heart Machine. These kind of like, some of those are like modern poster children kind of bands for the massive arena ready clean Melodeath, but like Arch Enemy and On Monomarth, they won't get name checked amongst that brutal shit because people forget those early records. This revives some of those entities, like Paradise Fail's main riff, even though that's the song which has the guy from Shadows Fall on it doing a guest vocal, but that could be on Burning Bridges by Arch Enemy, or again, like Once Sent from the Golden Hall. Those are like a couple of like the forgotten greatest Melodeath records of all time, and this kind of has that Melodeath jukebox feel to it, but it all ties it together with this kind of bow of like contemporary Taylor Young produced, gritty, hard, fit for 2024 kind of record.
Well, yeah, it's the grit and the energy that prevents this from feeling like, just a throwback or kind of thing we say about Lucifer. It doesn't feel like a pastiche, even though with each of these songs we've gone, that sounds like that sounds like that, and that sounds like that. But I think it's just the quality thing, because we've been through it. But Dusk Sang Fairest, that for me was the moment in the record where I went from I love this to, then maybe this is a genuinely special band, because that sort of mellow death ballad that In Flames perfected on Clayman, when that's done well, which barely anyone is now, it's a really like magical thing, and it just makes you want to like leap over the fire, like the ladies in the Wicker Man. Just when you think it's calmed down into that spacey acoustic bit, when it goes to that 20 seconds of furious metal, it just little tricks like that, quite simple ideas, make the whole thing feel so much more exciting. And again, I feel like a lot of Melodeath bands I've heard, or even bands that were once great that have kind of fallen off, a lot of the lead work, sort of after a few decades in the style, can feel a bit, like I say, cliched, unexciting. But listening to this record again, you just go, there's a reason why we like Twin Leads so much. Like, it's just one of the best sounding things. And Paradise Failed, which as a song isn't necessarily one of my favourites, but it's an early contender for the guitar solo of the year. Like, it gave me the same feeling I got when I first heard Dragon Force, where they just make playing guitar sound so much fun.
I mean, Paradise Failed to me, that's like the big banger on the record of like, let's have fun. And like those dueling guitar leads, it is just fun. The riffs kind of have a bit more of a groove to them. And that's the thing with this album, is that the excitement never goes away for me. It just keeps finding new ways to kind of like sound hungry and genuinely dangerous in a way that, again, a lot of the Melodeath that I have heard more recently, again, I haven't heard all of it, but it's always felt a bit too sanitized. They never shove in a chorus that kind of dampens the whole experience. It's just always all aggression all the time, but with just really nice melodic flourishes. And that to me is just constantly exciting across this album.
Yeah, and then the wild card, it ends on a cover, and at the very last moment, it's like it's the punk side of their brain has taken over, because it would be so easy to go, oh, let's do another version of Blinded by Fear, you know, one of those. Instead, the version of Dig Up Her Bones by the Misfits. I love that everybody just loves Dig Up Her Bones. It's like the only non-Danzig song that Twitching Tongues did in their Twitch Fit set. And there's this weird sensation of people going, that's actually one of my favourite Misfits songs, with a sort of air of contrarianism because it's a Graves one. But everybody says that? Like, anyway, much more pleasant to me than the other covers we've spoken about this week.
Like, I mean, that cover is just so much fun. It is like, again, the raucous, rowdy punk thing at the end of the album. That just sounds like totally out of left field and sounds a bit daft, but it's a banger, and they're clearly having so much fun with it.
Well, yeah, because at the point of the Lantern, I wasn't really paying attention to the track list, and when that closes and it's this sprawling, dynamic grand finale, yeah, it was like, okay, like I'm sort of getting up from my chair going, that's a great record. And then Dig Up Your Bones starts, and it took me a second. I thought, are they covering the Misfits for the last song on this record? And part of me wishes that it ended on the Lantern, and I think Dig Up Your Bones is technically a bonus track, so maybe I can have my cake and eat it. But this is just such a fun way to close things off. Like you say, it'd be so easy for them to just go, let's do Pinball Map, but just doing like a Michael Graves era Misfits song and nailing it.
Yeah, it's like one of the greatest tunes ever. The guitar riff sounds fucking sweet with this like gnarly tone on it. The chorus is just like rowdy, howling. It's got that kind of hardcore mentality. You can imagine them crowding around the mic in the studio for the gang vocals. It is a short album. Like, I think if you remove the cover, it's actually only 29 minutes of original music, which
perfect length for me.
Well, Terminal Spirit Disease is fucking short to the point of borderline being not an album as well. I think like The Lantern as a main album closer, I think is one of the stronger songs on the record. That feels quite climactic in its intro, and then you get and you know, like I said, it's not a metalcore record. It's a band going, you know, kind of obviously the thing to do would be like, oh yeah, make this kind of harder and more contemporary. We basically do what Dying Wish are doing or whatever. But instead, it's a flurry of like purely melodic death metal, but in a way that just kind of just refreshes the kind of pool of that a little bit. It's definitely, you know, the early metal highlight of the first few weeks of the year for sure.